Hey real estate investors, I am so excited to share with you the #1 way you can protect your assets and avoid a ton of taxes in the process. Let's go ahead and dive right in. What we're talking about today is called the Delaware Statutory Trust. It's the ultimate and long-term asset protection. It's what all the big boys are using when it comes into long-term asset holding for passive investments. And we use this strategy with over 2,000 real estate investors protecting over $5 billion in total assets. Now, I know what you're thinking here. Is this really too good to be true? And the answer is absolutely not. We've been doing this for over 5 years through a professional firm called Royal Legal Solutions. This is my company. I am Scott Royal Smith. I am the owner and founder, an attorney, as well as real estate investor. And I have a modern law firm that only helps real estate investors and entrepreneurs protect their wealth and build their freedom through real estate investing so that way they can go live amazing lives. So let me tell you guys about what a DST is and how you can use it. So the key feature of the DST is that it's going to allow you to be able to have an entity structure that's infinitely scalable and it's free to scale. So you're not having to pay more for entity structuring as you scale your real estate or your assets. You're also going to have really simple banking. You're going to be able to have everything through one bank account, which I know you're saying, "Phew, what a relief," because how many bank accounts might you be managing now if you have multiple entities? Well, you can leave all of those pains aside and just use a DST that has a single bank account with it, and it's anonymous. So if you're out there and you're thinking like, wow, I really don't want my neighbors and everybody to know how much I own, or maybe I'm worried about getting sued and I don't want these attorneys to be able to find out the full extent of my assets and say, hey, this is a great guy to go after to sue because it looks like he has a ton, then you're going to want to have anonymity, and the DST provides that. And the best part is, guys, it's simple, simple, simple. We mentioned the one bank account. It's also only just one entity to form and maintain. So as you scale, your operations don't get more complex because you have the single bank account. And as you scale, you only still have to maintain one entity to at the creation and only one entity to maintain. Now, when we look at some of the myths around the DST, some people think, hey, well, the DST really isn't suitable for real estate. Wrong. The best real estate investors are using the DST for the maximum protection of their assets. There's also the 7 deadly sins of the DST. These are all the things that you could do wrong and that have to be navigated correctly to be able to use the DST for real estate. But it's entirely possible to navigate those in a way that's going to give you all the benefits of the DST for your real estate investing. Now, some people also think that a DST can be difficult to manage and that it's too complex and they don't know how to manage trust. Don't worry about that. That's why you partner with professionals that are there to help you, and we have that kind of relationship where it has that kind of symbiotic relationship where we know that we're going to help you form the right way and scale your company and scale your assets, and as you grow, we anticipate growing as well. Now, other people that I've talked to said, well, do I really need the ultimate in protection, the very strongest protection that I can get with the DST? And they say, is it an overkill? And then my answer to it is, well, it's overkill only if you're security if you're security conscious, right? If you're really out there and you're thinking, man, I really want the ultimate peace of mind, then use the DST. If you're happy with taking on a little bit more risk, well, then there's other options that we can explore and talk about, and we have a number of master classes on what those other options might look like. Other people think that trusts are only for rich people, and that's not really true. It used to be only for rich people because they were so expensive to create and maintain, but now with Royal Legal Solutions, we're taking the very best strategies that were previously reserved just for the rich, and we're using them with the common investor and able to serve the common investor, so that way that the average investor out there can now have the very best solutions like the DST. Now, when you look at some of the top benefits of the DST, you have to look at what the alternatives are going to be. And most people are looking at alternatives that are using the LLC. Now, the LLC is a fantastic vehicle. It's the most tried and kind of true vehicle that most attorneys in the common everyday area know about LLCs and use them. Now, but if you really want the best protections, you have to start looking at your domestic asset protection trust. And then the DST is one of those types of domestic asset protection trusts that we use. And because of the series series function of the DST, it is the ideal domestic asset protection trust for that. Another great benefit of the DST is that it allows you to still continue to do business, and for a lot of investors, it allows them to do business in even better ways than they had ever thought of, because the DST allows for all of the 1031 exchange tax advantages that are available for real estate investors. Now, another great benefit to it is that it's one structure to hold all of your long-term investments. So instead of trying to manage 15 different entities as you grow, you get to keep all of your operations very simple with a single entity. Now, and other people are saying, well, the trust, hey, don't have to worry about all of the taxes that are going to be associated with doing this trust. Absolutely not. All of your tax treatment with the way that we form the DST at Royal Legal Solutions will stay exactly the same. Your taxes stay exactly the same. So nothing will change for you on the financial front in any way, especially with your taxes. And again, the single bank account and single tax return is how we're able to simplify the entire process. So you're actually saving money, not just on the entity formation and the entity scalability, but also in those yearly tax filings by not having to pay your CPA as much money to file for multiple entities. Now, next question is, do you personally need a DST? And the answer to that is think about this holistically. So holistically speaking, we look here at what we call here, this is the Freedom Temple at Royal Legal Solutions. What we're looking at is how do we create wealth first. We first have to make the money. Then we have to protect the money from the government by having tax strategies to be able to allow us to ensure that we're paying only the amount that we truly owe to the government. Then we have to look at our 5 pillars of asset protection, including anonymity, liability, separation, isolation, and insurance, to have those in line to say, hey, the assets that we built, we're not going to lose them from a lawsuit or from some other incident. And then lastly, what we're looking for is, hey, how can I create more time in my life and so I can better serve my legacy, my family, and ultimately have higher personal fulfillment. Now, when you're looking at the 3 types of protection between the LLC and, the DST and a combination of LLCs, there's 3 major things to look at. One is your operations. This is everything that's active in your business. This is your face to the world. And typically for this, what we're actually using is a traditional LLC. And that traditional LLC is going to sign all the contracts, hire the contractors, otherwise do all of the forward-facing business activities of the organization, right? If there's any liability that's coming up, we want that to all go to that LLC that doesn't own any assets. Then we have to look at how are we going to hold those assets that we do have, and that's where the DST comes in. And the DST holds both here our soft assets, and it also holds our hard assets. So in the soft assets, typically you can hold that in one of the child series of the DST, or you can hold it in the parent. If you don't know what that is, we'll dive into that a little bit more here in a second. And you can add anonymity to prevent the lawsuits from even starting in the first place, because we can hide the ownership of the asset itself, so that way your names are fully removed from the entity structure as well as the asset. So if anybody looks to sue you, it looks like you qualify for food stamps. And again, with the hard assets here, we will compartmentalize every single hard asset inside of a child series. One hard asset per child series, also created with anonymity structuring in place to ensure that people aren't finding any of those assets. So think of soft assets. Those don't have any individual liability. People can't just come after your bank account because your bank account didn't do anything wrong to them. We can hold those inside of the parent of the DST. Anything that has individual liability, like a car or a house or an apartment complex or a piece of land, all of that has individual liability. Something could happen to like that car wreck, or somebody gets hurt on the property, which triggers liability. Those we want to separate out into the individual child series of the series LLC. So when you're looking at what entity do you need, you don't need any entities at all. If you have no assets, you have poor credit, and you have no business activities, and you're not intending on improving your credit, you don't need an LLC, you don't need a DST. If any of those are true, then you should consider creating a business entity to help facilitate the growth of any of those areas. For getting a traditional LLC, it's always recommended if you want to protect your good credit, because even if you don't have any assets, if you have good credit, that itself is an asset. It's your access to capital. And so what you have to do is form an LLC to separate yourself from any of the businesses that you're doing. So that way, if there's a lawsuit regarding that business, it doesn't affect your personal credit score. The lawsuit goes against that LLC, and that way your personal credit stays in good tact. Now, also with forming an LLC now, what you're able to do is start the clock on building the business credit for that individual LLC. And what that looks like is usually a 2-year clock that looks at, well, how long has this business been in existence? And over time, the banks become more and more willing to be able to lend money directly to that LLC. So you have an independent financing stream separate from yourself with your business. Now, your traditional LLC can also be used to save you on taxes with all of the write-offs that you can claim for running that business, but also being able to choose how you want income to be taxed, whether it's going to be you individually, or whether you might want to elect for corporate taxation under certain circumstances, or like S corporation kinds of tax treatment where your income is split between dividend income and personal income, which helps you save on self-employment tax. So there's a number of benefits that a traditional LLC, just alone without any assets, is going to be able to provide you. Now, once you start having assets, that's where you need to start looking at like the series LLC or the DST structuring. Both of these entity structures allow you to be able to create child series. Now, the types of assets you have and the ways in which you're going to use those assets and where those assets are located can depend upon what is the proper entity structure, whether it would be a series LLC or a DST for holding multiples of those assets. So when would you want to get a DST versus a series LLC? So a series LLC is going to be appropriate for everybody that doesn't live or invest in California, for people that are going to be flipping real estate, doing any type of active business with real estate, and holding properties that are going to need substantial improvements, right? Like if you have to really do like a whole redo of the property, then you're going to want that to be in a series LLC. A DST is going to be appropriate for you if you live or invest in California, and that you want to just buy those assets and hold them long term and then rent them out, and you want the absolute best protection you can get before you start considering those expensive $25,000 to $50,000 offshore options that exist. Now we look at the asset holding companies that are available. There's 3 major strategies that you look for with inside of the asset holding company realm, right? One is a hub and spoke model. This is your typical model. It's the most traditional model. What this typically is that you have one entity that is an anonymous entity, typically a Wyoming LLC. That Wyoming LLC is formed anonymously. You'd want to create that Wyoming LLC to be owned by a trust, so that way it's not just anonymous in its first year, but any of the subsequent filings. An attorney would sign on behalf of that trust, and the trust would be the legal owner of the LLC, so that way you're protected, and not just in the first year, but in the subsequent years for the anonymity of that Wyoming LLC. And then that Wyoming LLC will own a number of LLCs underneath it. Those LLCs that are underneath it will then own the individual assets. Those LLCs are typically formed inside of the state where the asset is located. All of those LLCs formed all over the country to own all of those assets that are all over the country are all owned by the Wyoming LLC, and that then all of the income flows through that Wyoming LLC, ultimately up to you. Now, the Series LLC is the most cutting edge type of asset protection vehicle that we have. It works exactly like the hub and spoke model of LLCs, except that it's only one entity. So it's one Series LLC that gets created, and and underneath it can create an infinite number of what are called child series. Each child series acts just like an individual LLC for taxation purposes, and that you can use those child series to compartmentalize every single one of your assets, just like you would have used an LLC in the hub and spoke model. However, you don't have to pay for any of those individual child series, either the upfront creation costs or the yearly fees that are associated with it. So you get a huge cost savings of using the Series LLC, but provides the exact same protection as the hub and spoke model. And then lastly, what you have is a Delaware Statutory Trust. Because it's a trust structure, it's going to allow you certain advantages like avoiding franchise taxes, and that's exceptionally important if you live in California to be able to avoid those. But it works just like the Series LLC, where it's a parent up at the top and has individual child series, and each of those child series can and then in turn will own all of the assets. All of the soft assets, cash, stocks, anything else that's paper related, those are all held inside of the parent company, right? Or the parent that's filed, either whether that's the Series LLC or the DST, whichever one you're using that circumstance. And then all of the hard assets, think cars, sailboats, houses, any of those types of assets that have individual liability associated with them will all be underneath the individual child series. Now, with any of these entities, there are certain financing considerations that have to be taken into account that we have to navigate through. And there's also different limitations. So with the Delaware Statutory Trust, for example, you can't make like just gut the entire house down to the studs and then rebuild it, right? You also have to hold the property for a period of time such that it would qualify or look like you're looking to use it for a long-term investment purpose, not an active business. The Delaware Statutory Trust is not set up to have active businesses or for flipping assets. Any of those activities are going to be more appropriately done in a series LLC model or a hub and spoke model. Now, when you're looking at the Delaware Statutory Trust, though, it has the built-in anonymity and asset protection that otherwise the other two models you have to add on additional layers. Well, the DST has that all baked in, so it's a lot simpler, and it can help you save on those franchise taxes if you're having to pay franchise taxes or high yearly fees every year for your upkeep and maintenance of any of your asset protection. Now, this is the basics of the DST. This is the parent structure that I was telling you about earlier. It's one scalable system. So you have one parent. This is what's filed and created, and where the bank account is located is here at the parent. And it has each of these individual children that it just creates on its own. Right? It can create this by simply printing off a document on your printer and signing it and creating its own operating agreement or trust agreement associated with this child. And now you have a fully formed entity that works and will uphold for any of your asset protection. Now, with the cash and stocks, you can either hold that in child series A, like this diagram mentions here, or you can hold it up at the parent level. From our purposes for asset protection, it doesn't matter. It's one way or the other. We view it as the exact same protection, whatever way you want to do it. Some clients just have a preference, and we're happy to be flexible with you to on those types of issues. And you can see here that each of the individual child series can have different types of assets. So here, your child series A could have your cash and stocks. Child series B could have like an investment property, maybe your primary residence with that. And then child series C is in a property where you wanted to place money as part of a syndication investment. Maybe you wanted to put $50,000 in Bob's deal when he was buying that apartment. That would be the place that you can do it. Now, with all of these structures that we're talked about, the DST, the series LLC, and hub and spoke model, these can all be used on a national level based upon the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution. So there's no limitations on who this is going to be able to be used for or what states that it can be used with. Now, we believe that using the DST allows you to build smarter, because we know that as your organization grows, then that usually means that additional time and money has to get spent on just the overhead, just the organizational, like watching it and maintaining it, right? So that's, watching it, that's typically like accountants, right? Maintaining it is typically like all of your lawyer fees. So when we're looking at the DST structure, we're looking at how can we scale something that will allow us to be streamlined. So that's what we're looking for, saying, hey, it's one entity that has to be created and maintained. All of the information on the DST itself, as well as any of the underlying assets, are all protected, typically through anonymous trust structures, and that those are all created in conjunction with me as the attorney. So all the information there is protected by the attorney-client privilege, and all of your operations stay very simple, with one bank account, one set of accounting books, one or no tax filing, depending upon your tax filing situation, and that you have one scalable system no matter how big you get. The DST is very safe to use. If they could have attacked it by now, they would have. Nobody is trying to attack the DST on anything that says like, hey, this is a illegitimate entity, or you can't use the entity formed in Delaware here in Kentucky. The only attacks that have ever come up for like a DST itself are the same types of attacks that come up against LLCs, right? Typically, it revolves around mismanagement and almost relates to the accounting of the entity not being accurate or being properly maintained. So if it's properly maintained and you structure it with professional guidance, the DST will hold up. Now, you can use the DST in any state inside of the United States based upon the full faith and credit of the Constitution. So it's just like Delaware LLCs are used and created in Delaware and used everywhere throughout the United States, the Delaware Statutory Trust can be used in the exact same way. You're going to want to partner with your DST with professional guidance just to ensure that you're avoiding those 7 deadly sins and you're operating that DST correctly. If you're a member with Royal Legal Solutions, you're going to get that support on an unlimited ongoing basis at no additional cost. And you can use that one bank account, one set of accounting books, and not having those additional tax returns is a way to simplify your organization. So beyond the DST, what we're looking at here is adding in that shell operating company that I mentioned to you earlier. So the DST is going to hold all of the assets, but who's going to be doing all of the active business, hiring the contractors, being the face of the world? That is your operating company, and that's a traditional LLC that doesn't own any assets. Some people refer this to as shell company. There's nothing wrong with shell companies. Shell companies are there, and the wise people use them to be able to protect themselves from it. They're actually created, and the law allows them to create it specifically to be able to do these kinds of purposes. So there's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing shady about them. It's just something, it's a sophisticated tool to be able to use in your arsenal along with your Delaware Statutory Trust. And it's the way that you're able to create the decoy to be able to shelter all the liability through an entity that doesn't own anything and otherwise minimize your risks that you otherwise may have. It's also a way for us to create, going back to that freedom temple, one of the pillars there was separation. So we really want to create separation because separation from the active business activities from the asset holding company is the way in which you're able to compartmentalize the liability. So this shell LLC, our operating LLC, is a completely separate company. There's typically a contractual relationship that we establish between the DST and the LLC to be able to legitimize any money that's flowing in between those entities to show that these are two separate companies and we're treating them in that way, and that way we can avoid any piercing the corporate veil or any type of alter ego theories that may come up in terms of litigation. Now, when you look at the overall picture of what we do here at Royal Legal Solutions, this is the map. So you can see here's your asset holding company that has your parent DST with the anonymity trust in place, the child series with the land trust and the individual assets, assuming, these are assuming real estate investments, but they could be anything, right? Cash, stocks, it could be syndication investments, could be notes, could be anything. Here at the operating company, this is where we have that traditional LLC and anonymous trust. You'll see underneath this operating company is where we will structure out different types of retirement accounts. Those retirement accounts are there for tax sheltering purposes, right? So be able to max out like a self-directed IRA and your solo 401k to be able to build that tax-free wealth. And this entity structure allows us both for protection as well as tax minimization. Now, all of your entities are then owned by your living trust and your estate plan. And if you're above $2 million in net worth, you should be considering an offshore trust or a bridge trust and associate, so that way you have an offshore option in case you have to go nuclear on this. But your estate plan will ensure that everything is appropriately passing to your heirs, that you're avoiding probate court, and that things stay anonymous after you die, because if you don't have an estate plan in place, the government actually decides what happens to all your assets and who takes care of your children. So if you have any type of significant assets and you care what happens to them at all if you die, or if you have children, you must have an estate plan in place to ensure that you're in control of those situations. Now here's a quick owner's manual of the DST. So we talked about before. It's now when we're looking at the DST, it's our most popular and time-tested type of entity structure here. You can use the parent and child series with the land trust in the same type of way, whether this is a DST or a series LLC with the individual child series, the individual land trusts, and the individual assets, or if you were using this as a hub and spoke model, this would be a Wyoming LLC, and these would be individual LLCs here, and it would still have the same land trust and asset underneath it. The reason that we always use land trust is because we want the property to be as anonymous as possible. So if it's the property is owned at 123 Main Street, it's always going to be held in the 123 Main Street Trust, and that anything associated with that trust always ties back to the attorney of the law firm, and therefore all the information is protected by the attorney-client privilege. Now what that means is if anybody looks to sue that asset, they can't find that it's attached to you, and they can't find that it's attached to any of the other assets. If they do sue, it's always stopped. either by the child series, if this is a DST or a series LLC, or if you're using the hub and spoke model, this would just be the LLC. So the land trust provides the anonymity, the child series or the individual LLC, if you're using the hub and spoke model, would provide the ultimate protection to make sure that if there was a lawsuit against this asset, they could only go against this asset. They can't go after you personally, and they can't go after any of the other assets there. Now, when you're looking to protect the assets and acquire new assets, what you need to do is typically you'll buy the property inside of your personal name, and then you'll transfer the asset into the corresponding land trust. And the reason that you do it this way is by transferring the asset into the land trust, it avoids the due on sale clause per the St. Germain Act. So we don't have to worry about that when we're getting the best possible financing, which is always going to be those conforming loans. So for your first 10 properties, if you're a single family home investor, that's going to be what you're going to focus on, is getting those conforming loans, buying those assets, and then transferring it into your asset holding company. Same thing when you're going to be buying those properties and protecting them. You're going to want to make sure that the money is flowing appropriately, to you, and then to buy that asset, and then having that asset pulled underneath the structure. When you're selling the property, you can sell the property directly out of the trust. And we found with some cases with title companies that they're more comfortable if the asset is sold out of an independent LLC or the client's individual name. So there's some negotiation that happens on that front with title companies in some circumstances. But there's no legal reason that you can't just sell the asset directly out of the trust, or simply just sell the trust to the person. The trust owns the asset. So it's going to be the same there. Now, when you're refinancing, there's financing institutions that in some circumstances will be willing to be able to refinance directly inside of a land trust or a DST. However, what we find is that the best financing terms, of course, are going to be through the conforming loans, right? So when we want to do the refinancing, oftentimes what will happen is we'll take the property, we'll deed it out of the land trust back to the client's personal name, refinance it, and then deed it back in, all using warranty deeds. So that way the title insurance is preserved. Now, the money flows inside of any of these entities in any of these structures in all the same way. All the asset holding company here, which says the parent, the child, the trust, and the asset, this is in any asset holding model. This is going to be your asset holding company. Your asset holding company ultimately owns this house. This house will then have a renter in it that's going to pay rent to the operating company, because this is the company that has the contractual relationship with the renter. And then the operating company will turn around and pay the DST or the Series LLC or the Wyoming LLC as the holding company of the underlying LLCs, depending on if you're using the hub and spoke model, the Series LLC model, or the DST model. And that parent will then in turn turn around and pay the individual owner, which is you. Your taxes are very, very easy to file. If you're single, it's going to be a disregarded entity, and you just file onto the Schedule E either on behalf of your Series LLC or your DST. If you're married and in a community property state, then I think you typically have to file if you're in a community property state, it's going to be the exact same as the above with that. So it's just all going to be onto the Schedule E of your personal return. If there's unmarried partners, or if you're in a separate property state, then you'll end up having to issue the K1, the K1s, and as your CPA would advise for that. So when you're looking at the unmarried partners here, just to go over that again. So if you have unmarried partners, what's going to happen is that you have the rent gets paid. Here in this example, we don't have an operating company, which happens in some circumstances. And so that here the renter is actually paying rents directly to the DST. Then the DST is going to turn around and then pay the owners, which is this unmarried partners, or it's going to be unmarried, and then then K1s will be issued from the parent entity to the unmarried partners to allow them to be able to file their personal taxes. Now, if you're single or married, it's the same process here, except for the fact that it's going to be a disregarded entity that reports the income on the Schedule E of the personal return. So we get a lot of questions about the DST, and our most frequent questions are involved of, who is the DST most appropriate for? It's most appropriate for people who want the ultimate and domestic asset protection before they want to take on the expense of going offshore, and for California residents, that either people that have assets in California or that they live in California. It's ideal because it helps them avoid the $800 per year in franchise taxes they have to pay for an LLC. Now, inside of a DST, it can hold many different types of assets inside of it. However, what it can't do is it can't do like flipping or major rehabs inside of a DST. It's just for long-term buy and hold assets or otherwise bank accounts, LP investments, vehicles, brokerage accounts, etc. When you're looking to transfer assets into a DST, you're also going to be able to accomplish that by either using a warranty deed to transfer a physical asset, like a piece of real estate, or what you can also use is just an assignment of interest. Let's say if you have a syndication or other types of investments, or you can change the name of your brokerage account to then reflect the name of the DST, and that will move ownership from your name into the name of the DST. And then the DST is also very easy to maintain. There is annual maintenance for the DST. It is not very expensive at all, and we are able to accomplish that type of maintenance for you on a yearly basis and monitor any changes in terms of strategy and compliance associated with the DST to ensure that you're getting the absolute best in service there, as well as us monitoring any lawsuits that might be regarding the DST and any updates that may be needed for any changes in the law. Awesome. So that was about the DST. That was our presentation today. Thank you so much for joining me. Of course, my name is Scott Royal Smith. I'm the owner of Royal Legal Solutions, and I just want to congratulate you on taking those next steps forward with protecting your assets and growing your wealth, because there's nothing more important for financial freedom and your first steps to living the life that you've always dreamed of. I want to see you get to that endpoint and be able to excel in your life, and the best way to do that is to make sure you don't have to take any back steps, and that's what asset protection, estate planning, and tax strategy is all about. It's the most efficient way to get to the endpoint and also ensure that once you're there, you don't end up taking a back step. And if you want to make a further connection with us, the best way to do that is to take the quiz on royallegalsolutions.com. So right now, go to royallegalsolutions.com and take the quiz on that page to be connected to the staff, and I'd love to send you a ton of great materials that are going to be particular and helpful for you in evaluating what is the appropriate asset protection and tax and estate planning structure that you need as an entrepreneur or real estate investor that's pursuing financial freedom. So go to royallegalsolutions.com right now and take the quiz.